Hey friends, welcome back to the Third Shift Crafts podcast. I'm Lauren, and today we're going to do something a little different. We're not standing over a cutting board in the shop, we're not firing up a grill, and we're not peeking into a carboy of wine bubbling away. Instead, I want to zoom out and talk about the why behind all of it. This episode is called Life Crafted, Slow Living in a Fast World. And if you're anything like me, just hearing the word slow probably makes you sigh a little bit, in a good way. Because life as it's designed right now is not slow. Life is buzzing, it's jam-packed. Is push notification pings an endless task list? It's that little nagging voice that says, do more, do it faster, and if you stop to breathe, you're already behind. I don't know about you, but I've lived in that mode. Honestly, I still do sometimes. I can fall into the trap of rushing through my day, stacking obligations like Jenga blocks, waiting for the moment when it all topples. And what I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is that rushing doesn't actually get me closer to the life I want. It just leaves me frazzled, drained, and feeling like I missed the point. That's where creating comes in, whether it's woodworking or tending a fire for dinner, or watching yeast slowly transform juice into wine. The act of making something by hand pulls me back into the present. It grounds me. It's the opposite of instant gratification. You can't rush wood grain. You can't demand that coals heat up faster. You can't shout at a fermenting batch of wine and have it be ready tomorrow. These processes move on their own timeline, and the only thing you can do is lean into that rhythm. And let me tell you, there's freedom in that. When I'm sanding a board in my shop, I can feel my brain unclench a little. It's not about producing something in record time. It's about the sound of the sander, the feel of the wood, the quiet progress of smoothing rough edges. When I'm out by the grill on a Sunday, chicken sizzling away, I can actually let myself sit with a glass of wine, breathe, and enjoy the fact that the food will be ready when it's ready. And when I'm making wine, that's the slowest of all. It's weeks, months, sometimes even a year before you get to taste the fruits of your labor. And in that waiting, you learn patience. You learn trust. You learn to let go of control. That's the heartbeat of this episode, because it's not really about woodworking or grilling or winemaking, not at the core. It's about what those practices teach us. They teach us to pause. They remind us that not everything worthwhile can be rushed. They show us that there's value in the process, not just the finished product. So here's what we're going to do today. First, I want to talk about why creating feels grounding. Why the act of making something can pull you out of the chaos of everyday life and root you right back in the present moment. Then I'll share some stories about times I've felt most rooted in my shop, around my grill, or even in the kitchen when life outside was anything but peaceful. After that, I'll give you some practical tips for carving out just 30 minutes a week to create something, because I know time is the number one obstacle for most people. And then we'll close with a little reframing for those of you who feel like, I just don't have time for this. I promise, by the end of this episode, you might see your time and your creativity in a whole new light. So if you're listening right now while multitasking, folding laundry, commuting, answering emails, or maybe even scrolling your phone, I want to invite you to do something radical. Take a breath. Just one. Inhale, exhale, you're here. And for the next little while, we're going to slow down together. Because life is fast, but the way we live it, that's something we get to craft. You ever notice how your mind feels when you're scrolling your phone, bouncing between tabs, trying to answer 3 texts at once while also half listening to someone in the room? It's scattered. Your attention feels like it's being pulled apart, thread by thread, until there's not much left. That's the speed of the world we live in. Constant input, constant demand. But then there's this other experience, the one where your hands are full, maybe holding a plane against a piece of oak, or brushing oil over a chicken you're about to grill, or stirring a batch of fruit juice as the yeast begins to bubble up. In those moments, your brain shifts gears. The noise fades, even if it's still there in the background, and you come into the strange, rare quiet. That's grounding. That's what creating does. It pulls you back down out of the swirl and plants your feet in the moment. For me, grounding isn't about shutting out the world completely. It's not like I walk into my garage shop, close the door, and suddenly life's problems disappear. My to-do list doesn't just evaporate because I've lit a chimney starter for charcoal. But what happens is this: the scale of the world shrinks to something I can hold in my hands. Instead of juggling 100 things, I'm just sanding this board. Instead of answering 15 emails, I'm just seasoning this chicken. Instead of worrying about the whole arc of my future, I'm just siphoning wine into a clean carboy. The process simplifies the chaos. And I think that's what makes it feel so deeply grounding. You can't do 3 things at once when you're holding a hot pan. You can't overanalyze a dozen scenarios while you're watching the line of your saw cut and trying to keep it straight. You're invited, sometimes even forced, to pay attention. and attention is presence. Let me share a woodworking example first. There are days when I walk into the shop already wound tight, shoulders up by my ears, brain buzzing with everything I should be doing. On those days, I don't usually start with the big builds. I'll grab something simple, maybe a board that needs sanding or a small project that's half done. The minute I put sandpaper to wood, something changes. It's not that my problems vanish, but the edges soften. My breathing evens out. My hands move in rhythm. There's this shift from spinning out to settling in. Cooking does the same thing. Think about it. There's something primal about preparing food over fire. You have to pay attention. The flames, the heat, the timing, but at the same time, it's not complicated. Oil, salt, pepper, garlic, the basics. A whole chicken doesn't ask you for a 15-step recipe. It just asks you to be patient while the fire does its work. And in that patience, you find yourself slowing down too. I'll pour a glass of wine, lean back in a chair, and let the smoke curl up into the air. Suddenly, the rush of the week doesn't feel so loud. And winemaking, that's the ultimate practice in grounding, because it's not immediate at all. You don't get the satisfaction of chopping vegetables and eating them an hour later. You don't even get the overnight payoff of fresh bread. Wine takes months, sometimes longer. It forces you to let go of instant results. Every time I walk past a carboy bubbling in the corner, I'm reminded not everything worth having can be rushed. The process unfolds on its own clock, and in a strange way, that slows me down too. So, why does creating feel grounding? Because it reminds us that we're human, and humans weren't built for nonstop scrolling, constant distraction, or multitasking ourselves into oblivion. We were built to use our hands, to focus on one thing at a time, to feel textures, smell smells, and hear sounds. There's also a sense of control that comes with it, not in a rigid, perfectionist way, but in a here's something I can shape way. The world might feel overwhelming, politics might be a mess, my inbox might be exploding, but in this moment, I can smooth this piece of wood. I can season this chicken. I can watch yeast do its quiet, invisible work, and that's enough. Another piece of it, and this one might be the most powerful, is that creating has a way of reconnecting you with your senses. When you're anxious, your brain loves to live in the future. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? But when you're building or cooking or fermenting, your senses call you back. You hear the scrape of the saw, you smell the smoke, you feel the heat of the grill, you see the bubbles forming in your wine. And just like that, your brain comes home to your body. It's like meditation, only instead of sitting cross legged trying to chase away thoughts, you're moving, making, tasting, and touching. The craft itself becomes the meditation. And here's the other thing I've noticed. When you feel grounded, you show up differently in the rest of your life. After I spend a few hours in the shop, I'm calmer when I walk back inside. After cooking dinner outside, I sit down at the table with a different kind of presence. After bottling a batch of wine, I feel this little glow of accomplishment that follows me through the week. It's not just about what happens during the making, it's about how the making changes you after. That's why creating feels grounding, because it's not just about the object at the end, the cutting board, the roasted chicken, the bottle of wine. It's about who you become in the process. More rooted, more present, more human. And in a world that constantly tries to pull us in 100 directions, that's a kind of quiet rebellion. Choosing to slow down, choosing to make something with your hands, choosing presence over speed. That's the power of crafting a life, not just a project. When I think about the times in my life I felt the most rooted, they're not the big milestones. They're not the promotions, the fancy events, or the trips that look good on social media. They're almost always the quieter, smaller moments where I was doing something with my hands, where the world slowed me down enough for me to notice it. Let me tell you a woodworking story first. There was this one night in the shop, nothing special about it, just a Thursday evening when I'd finished dinner and wandered into the garage with no particular plan. I remember standing there looking at the scraps of wood and piled up from different projects and deciding just to grab a piece and see what happened. No pressure, no deadline, no client waiting, just me and a piece of pine. I started sanding the way you do when you don't quite know what else to do. Sandpaper against the wood is the steady, rhythmic sound. Shh, shh, shh. Before long, I fell into it. The smell of the sawdust filled the air, and I could see the grain of the wood starting to come alive. I wasn't thinking about bills or emails or the dozen things waiting for me tomorrow. I wasn't thinking at all, really. I was just there, present. And that's what rooted feels like. You're not pulled forward into worry or backward into regret. You're in the moment, and that moment is enough. Another story, this time from the grill. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the weather practically begs you to be outside. I'd spatchcocked the chicken, rubbed it down with olive oil, salt, pepper, and garlic, my holy trinity, and set it over charcoal on the kettle. As the fire caught and the chicken started to sizzle, I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled up a chair. Now I could have gone back inside, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, ticked things off my list, but instead I stayed put. I watched the smoke curl upward, gray blue against the sky. I listened to the little pops and crackles from the coals. Every so often, I lifted the lid to check on the chicken, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. That was it. That was the whole afternoon. And when I sat down later to carve that bird with the skin crisp and the meat juicy, it wasn't just about dinner. It was about the experience of being rooted in that little window of time. I didn't rush it. I didn't multitask it. I let the fire set the pace. And in doing that, it set my pace too. Winemaking has given me some of these moments as well, though they look a little different. There's a kind of magic in walking past a carboy that's quietly bubbling away in the corner of the room. You don't have to do much. The yeast is doing the work, but you notice it, day by day. I remember my first successful batch after that strawberry experiment. It was a peach wine made from fruit juice I picked up at a local market. Nothing fancy, but every time I checked on it, I felt this sense of anticipation. Would it turn out? Would it taste good? When the day finally came to bottle it, I siphoned the liquid into clean glass, watching it run clear and golden. The clink of bottles, the slight tang of alcohol in the air, the careful push of corks into place. It was all so tactile, so real. I wasn't thinking about the results in the big picture sense. I wasn't trying to compare myself to anyone else's wine. I was just rooted in the act of bottling something I'd watched over weeks and months. And later, when I poured a glass and tasted it, I felt this deep satisfaction. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it was mine, and because the process itself had grounded me through so many evenings of waiting, checking, and learning patience. I think what ties these stories together is that sense of slowing down. Each one pulled me out of the rush of the world and into something tangible, something that existed right in front of me, and honestly, that's rare. The modern world doesn't give us a lot of space for that, but we can carve it out. Sometimes being rooted comes in the middle of chaos, too. I remember a particularly stressful week where everything felt like it was unraveling. Work stress, personal stress, you name it. Instead of spiraling on the couch, I started a simple project, building a small shelf. Nothing big, nothing Instagram worthy, just a shelf. I measured, I cut, I drilled, and little by little, as the shelf took shape, so did my sense of calm. I walked away from that project not just with a place to set some books, but with a steadier heart. The same has happened over a meal. There was one night when I was bone tired, the kind of tired where even ordering takeout feels like too much. But I pulled a bag of frozen vegetables from the freezer, tossed them in the microwave, and paired them with some grilled chicken I'd made earlier in the week. Nothing gourmet, nothing photo worthy, but as I sat down with that plate, I realized how much calmer I felt having cooked for myself, even in the simplest way. And maybe that's the point. Being rooted doesn't always look like an elaborate build or a showstopper meal. Sometimes it's in the scraps, the simple projects, the everyday food, the carboy bubbling in the corner. Those are the moments I hold on to because they remind me of what it feels like to be present, to be grounded, to be alive in a body that creates instead of just consumes. So when I talk about slow living, I'm not talking about dropping everything and moving to a cabin in the woods. I'm talking about grabbing those little chances to root yourself, whether it's a whole afternoon with a chicken on the grill or just 10 minutes sanding a piece of wood. Those chances add up. They build a rhythm. They change the way you carry yourself in the rest of life. And if I've learned anything from these stories, it's this. You don't have to wait for the perfect time or the perfect project to feel grounded. You just have to show up. The grounding will meet you there. Here's the thing about slowing down to create. Most of us don't feel like we have time. The to-do list is always there, the house needs cleaning, the emails pile up, and if you've got kids or a partner or a job that follows you home, it can feel like your me time is basically non-existent. I get it. I've lived it. But here's what I've also learned. You don't need an entire Saturday or some magical block of 3 hours to get grounded through making. 30 minutes a week, just 30, can change your rhythm, your stress levels, even the way you feel about your own life. So let's talk about how to make that happen. When people imagine woodworking, they picture massive projects, dining tables, bed frames, heirloom pieces, and yes, those are amazing, but they're also time consuming. If you're waiting until you have that much time to start, you'll never start. Instead, pick small projects that can live in 30-minute windows. A simple shelf, a birdhouse, sanding down a cutting board, staining a project you already built. Even just cleaning and organizing your tools can count. Because here's the truth. Being creative isn't just about the final product. It's about showing up for the process. Same goes for cooking. You don't have to tackle a 3-course meal every time you want to ground yourself. Try a quick grilled flatbread, a one-pan stir fry, or even just prepping vegetables for the week. Lighting the grill, chopping onions, stirring a pan, those small acts can be deeply grounding, and you can absolutely do them in 30 minutes. Winemaking takes longer in the big picture, but the tasks themselves can fit into small chunks. Sanitizing equipment, racking a batch, checking the airlock, none of that takes hours. It's about shifting your mindset. Instead of saying, I don't have time to make wine, ask, do I have 20 minutes to tend to it today? Because often the answer is yes. One of the easiest way to actually make space for creative time is to tie it to something that you're already doing. If Sunday afternoons are when you usually cook dinner, tack on an extra 30 minutes before or after to putter in the workshop. If Friday night is your wine and TV time, make it your wine and racking time instead. In my life, Sunday dinner has become a built-in ritual. It's always some variation of the whole chicken, potato, and a vegetable, smoked, grilled, sous vide, whatever the mood strikes. Because it's already a rhythm, it doesn't feel like extra work. It feels like part of life. That's the trick. You can do the same thing with your creative making. Anchor it to a ritual you already have. Saturday morning coffee, your kids' nap time, even the half hour before bed. If you start treating it like brushing your teeth, something that's just part of the flow, you won't feel guilty about squeezing it in. It becomes second nature. Here's one of the biggest barriers I see. People finally get 30 free minutes, but by the time they clear the table, find the tools, dig through the garage, and remember where they put the sandpaper, the whole block is gone. That's where prep comes in. Set up your space in advance. For woodworking, I keep my tables on wheels so I can move them around easily. My sander clamps and safety glasses all live in one tub, so I'm never searching. For cooking, I try to keep my garage stocked with charcoal or pellets so I don't waste time running to the store. For winemaking, I wash and sanitize the night before so the next day I can get straight to the fun part. You'd be amazed at how much easier it is to show up when the friction is gone. If you only have 30 minutes, you want those 30 minutes to actually be making, not digging around for missing pieces. This one's huge. If you believe you can't stop until the project is finished, you'll never start. The reality is, most creative work can be picked up and put down. You can sand one side of a board and come back tomorrow. You can prep ingredients now and cook later. You can rack wine today and bottle it weeks from now. Some of my most grounding moments have been in those little bursts. 30 minutes of sanding, then back to my day. A quick marinade thrown together before work, then grilled at night. A siphon transfer while dinner's cooking. Those moments may seem small, but they stack. And together, they create a body of work you'll be proud of, without ever requiring you to clear an entire weekend. This might sound funny, but hear me out. Sometimes giving yourself a clear boundary is what makes creative time possible. If you've only got 30 minutes, you won't feel guilty about it dragging on. You won't worry about neglecting something else. So set a timer and make it gentle. Not a blaring alarm, but something that feels like a soft nudge. Let it tell you, you've had your 30 minutes. You can wrap up now or keep going if it feels right. That way the time is both structured and flexible. If you're only giving yourself short bursts, you have to let go of the idea that every project will be Instagram perfect. Some weeks you'll just sand, some weeks you'll just stir, some weeks you'll just move wine from one carboy to another. And that's okay. The win is not in the masterpiece. The win is in showing up. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a half-finished project or a batch of wine still bubbling away and thought, that doesn't look like much. But then I remember, it's a piece of my life, crafted in the cracks of time, and when I finally get to hold the finished thing, it carries all those 30-minute windows inside it. Want to make sure you keep coming back? Pair your creative time with something else you love. For me, it's music. I'll put on a playlist while sanding or strum my guitar while waiting for the grill to heat. Sometimes I'll pour a small glass of wine while bottling a batch. That little bit of joy makes the process even more grounding. You could also stack it with podcasts, maybe even this one, or use it as your quiet, no phone time. Whatever you choose, let it be something that makes you look forward to those 30 minutes even more. Here's the bottom line. 30 minutes is enough. It's not about overhauling your life or quitting your job to build furniture full time. It's about weaving small, grounding acts of creation into the life you already have. Wood, fire, wine, or whatever your tools are, they don't demand endless hours. They just ask you to show up, to give them a little space in your week, to let them root you one half hour at a time. And when you do, something shifts. You realize you do have time. You realize slowing down doesn't require a vacation or a retreat. It just requires intention. So if you've been thinking, I don't have time for this, try this experiment. Pick one small thing this week, just 30 minutes. Sand a board, grill a simple meal, rack a batch of wine, and notice how you feel afterward. I'll bet it's lighter, calmer, more rooted. And that feeling, that's the whole point. Let's be real. I could give you every tip in the world, timers, prep hacks, tiny projects, but at the end of the day, some of you listening are still thinking, that all sounds nice, but I just don't have time. And I get it. Life is packed. Maybe you're working two jobs. Maybe you're raising kids. Maybe your body's been through it and your energy is already maxed out just keeping up with the everyday demands. When I was recovering from my surgeries back in early 2024, there were days where even the thought of lifting a gallon of juice for winemaking felt impossible. So trust me, I'm not saying this from some ivory tower where I've got endless hours to play in the workshop or cook elaborate meals. But here's the hard truth I've had to tell myself, and maybe you need to hear it too. It's not always about time, it's about permission. We say we don't have time, but if you look at how the hours actually go, a lot of them disappear into things that don't leave us feeling grounded or alive. Scrolling on our phones, binge watching a show we don't even love, saying yes to obligations we don't even care about. I'm not saying those things are bad. Rest and entertainment matter. But if every week slips by without you touching something that roots you, it's worth asking, is it really about time, or is it about what I'm giving my time to? I once heard someone say, if you don't choose how to spend your time, someone else will choose for you. And that stuck with me. Because when I look back at the seasons where I let life dictate everything, I don't remember feeling rested or free. I remember feeling depleted. But when I carved out even 30 minutes to make, sanding, stirring, bottling, grilling, I remember those. They added something to my life that the passive stuff never could. So here's the question for you. When time slips by, what do you want it to be filled with? One of the reasons we say we don't have time is because we've been conditioned to believe our hours only count if they're productive, if they're making money, advancing a career, checking boxes. But making, whether it's woodworking, cooking, or winemaking, doesn't have to be productive to be valuable. In fact, part of its power is that it resists that mindset. It says, this moment matters because you showed up, not because it's making you money. I know that can feel radical, especially if you spent years working jobs that demanded every ounce of you, or if you grew up in a home where rest was frowned upon. But here's the encouragement I want to give you. You deserve time that isn't for anyone else, time that isn't monetized, time that's just yours. And creative making is a beautiful way to reclaim that. It's not about justifying it, it's about receiving it as good in itself. Another thing that's easy to forget is how much tiny investments of time add up. You may think, what's the point of 30 minutes? But future you will feel the difference. Imagine this. 6 months from now, you could have built 3 or 4 small woodworking projects, each one carrying a little story of where you were that week. You could have made half a dozen simple but delicious meals that became memories around the table. You could have bottled 2 or 3 batches of wine, enough to share at holidays, enough to gift, enough to open on a random Tuesday night and smile because you made this. Now compare that to 6 months of no space for yourself. Nothing built, nothing stirred, nothing bottled, just the same blur of work, chores, and obligations. Which version of you do you want to meet 6 months from now? Sometimes the fear of not having time is really about shame. We look at people who've been woodworking for years, or who seem to cook elaborate meals every night, or who always have a fresh batch of homemade wine on hand, and we think, I could never catch up. But you don't need to catch up. You just need to start. I'll be honest, my first batch of wine wasn't great. My first woodworking projects were uneven, clunky, and far from perfect. I've burned my share of chicken on the grill. But here's the thing, those imperfect firsts were still worth it. They taught me, they rooted me, they gave me stories to tell. So if you've been telling yourself you don't have time because you're too far behind, let me remind you, you're not behind. You're beginning. And beginnings always take the time they take. Another mental block I hear a lot is this: if I don't have a whole setup, it's not worth it. But that's not true. You don't need a full wood shop to start woodworking. You don't need a professional kitchen to start cooking. You don't need a vineyard to start making wine. You can start with what you have where you are: a jigsaw and a small table, a single cast iron pan and a stove top, a bucket, some juice, and a packet of yeast. That's it. Don't let the picture of what it should look like keep you from doing what it can look like. Creative making doesn't demand a production, it just asks for a little space. When I say make 30 minutes for woodworking or cooking or winemaking, you might hear, add one more thing to your already endless list. But I want you to hear it differently. Give yourself care in the form of creation, because that's what it is. When you sand a board, you're not just sanding wood, you're smoothing out your own rough edges from the week. When you stir a pot, you're not just making food, you're feeding yourself something deeper than calories. When you rack a batch of wine, you're not just moving liquid, you're moving your spirit toward patience and presence. This isn't extra work, this is care, and you deserve care. And if 30 minutes really feels impossible, start smaller. Take 10 minutes to wipe down your tools, chop an onion for tomorrow's dinner, Pour juice into a fermenter and sprinkle yeast. That's it. Sometimes the best way to build a habit is to shrink it until it feels laughably doable. 10 minutes here, 15 there. Over time, those minutes grow. Before you know it, you've carved out the 30 without even trying. If you take nothing else from this episode, let it be this. Your life is worth slowing down for. The world will always demand more from you. It will always tell you you don't have time. But the truth is, you don't have time not to. Because when you create, you come home to yourself. You step out of the blur, even just for a moment, and you remind your soul, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm allowed to savor this. And that is worth every minute you can find. So let's take a breath together. We've walked through a lot in this episode. From why making feels grounding to the little stories of stillness I found in the shop and the kitchen to some practical ways to carve out time even in the middle of a busy life. If you've been listening all the way through, maybe you're already sensing it. This isn't just about woodworking or cooking or even that bottle of wine sitting quietly in the corner of your kitchen. It's about the kind of life you want to live. I call this episode Life Crafted Slow Living in a Fast World because that's really what it comes down to. The world will keep spinning at a breakneck pace. Notifications will keep pinging, to-do lists will keep piling up. But in the middle of all that noise, you and I have a choice. Do we just keep running with it faster and faster? Or do we plant our feet, put our hands on something real and say, this moment is mine? And you know what? That choice doesn't have to look huge or dramatic. It might look like sanding one board, not finishing the project in a day. It might look like grilling a simple meal outside instead of rushing through takeout. It might look like starting a 1-gallon batch of wine with fruit juice you grabbed at the store instead of telling yourself you'll do it someday when life slows down. Because here's the truth. Life doesn't slow down on its own. We have to make the choice to slow it down. When I think back to the moments that I felt most alive, most human, they weren't the fast ones. They weren't the times I was checking off 10 tasks in a row or rushing to meet a deadline. They were the times I paused, the times I shaped wood with my hands, the times I smelled smoke curling up from the grill and felt the night air on my skin. The times I tipped a glass of wine I had made myself and thought, I created this. This came from me. Those aren't just hobbies. They're reminders. They remind me of who I am when the world wants me to forget. They remind me that there's more to life than output and achievement. They remind me that joy doesn't have to be complicated. It can live in sawdust and fire and fruit bubbling into something new. And if you're listening, I want you to hear this. You deserve those reminders too. So here's my encouragement to you as we close out today's conversation. Don't wait for the perfect conditions. Don't wait until your schedule clears. Don't wait until you feel ready. Pick one small thing this week. One board, one meal, one step in a batch of wine. Because those small things, they're not small. They're the threads that stitch together a slower, more grounded life. They're the proof that you're allowed to reclaim your time, even if just a little. And who knows? That one board might become a gift that lives in someone's kitchen for years. That one meal might be the memory your kids talk about when they're grown. That one bottle of wine might be the thing you open months from now and smile over because you slowed down long enough to make it. If today's episode stirred something in you, maybe even reminded you of the creative spark you've been missing, or gave you permission to slow down even when the world says you can't, I'd love for you to carry this conversation forward. Here's how you can do that. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. We'll keep diving into these themes of making, living, and slowing down together. Share this episode with a friend who needs that reminder, someone who's been running on fumes and could use the nudge to reclaim just a little time for themselves. And if you want to connect more deeply, whether it's through blog posts, recipes, woodworking projects, or even winemaking experiments, come hang out with me at thirdshiftcrafts.com or over on Instagram. That's where the conversation keeps going. At the end of the day, this podcast isn't just about what I make. It's about what we're making together. A community of people who believe in the value of creating, savoring, and slowing down. So take this as your invitation. Not to rush, not to hustle, but to craft a little more life into your days. Because your life is worth crafting. Thanks for spending this time with me today, friends. Until next time, keep creating, keep savoring, and keep slowing down.